Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I'm here with a impromptu video. I hadn't planned on making a video like this, but a few hours ago, the Criterion Collection, via its website, made an announcement with respect to a planned release forthcoming in July 14th or on July 14th, 2020. It's already available for pre-order on Criterion's online store, so check out the website if you can. Spine 1036. This is Bruce Lee, his greatest hits. Now you can check out the artwork that is being proposed for this particular release, again in July. You can check out the artwork directly at criterion.com. You can get better quality resolution pictures of it. And so I apologize, as always, for my poor presentation skills. But the artwork that is being suggested, at least on the website, is as follows. And the films that are going to be included with accompanying artwork are The Big Boss from 1971, Fist of Fury, 1972, The Way of the Dragon, 1972, Enter the Dragon, 1973, wow, Game of Death, 1978. Once again, I have to apologize for my poor presentation skills, but if you are interested in taking a look at the artwork, please check the Criterion website directly for better quality pictures. I should say that the new cover designs are credited to Jian Galang, according to the website, so really interesting stuff. I am very happy with this particular announcement. I have been a fan of Bruce Lee films since I was a little kid. I've grown up watching them on VHS and subsequently on DVD and now on Blu-ray many times. I really love his films very much, and they mean so much to me. This news is not entirely a surprise, of course, because in the past New Year's Clue, the Bruce Lee films in some kind of box set was hinted at. So to get this news this year, of course, is very nice, a very nice thing indeed, and it is a kind of fulfillment, if you will, of part of that New Year's Clue. Incidentally, I should point out that for anyone who has heard this news from Criterion and might feel maybe disappointed or underwhelmed, or maybe you are not necessarily a fan of Bruce Lee films, please don't worry, because my understanding is that Criterion will continue to release other box sets if that New Year Clue is to be believed, and I really believe it. So there's a lot to look forward to other than this Bruce Lee set. But so in case you are somewhat disappointed by this announcement, again, don't worry, because hopefully Criterion will release other really great box sets or sets of films, hopefully later this year or maybe very soon thereafter. So let's keep an eye out for that news as well when it indeed arrives. But for now, my friends, let us look at this set, Bruce Lee's his greatest hits. Bruce Lee, his greatest hits. Now we should note from the outset that according to the website, Criterion will be planning to release these films under one collective spine number, not under individual spine numbers for each of the films. This is something that Criterion does with some of its sets and not necessarily for others. We see collective spine numbers given to the films, for instance, in the Zatoichi set, also in the Godzilla set, etc. This is for the most part true, of course, for the Olympics box set, although there is an exception as to an individual release that was made earlier that is still included in that box set, of course. But for the most part, that's true for that set as well. And then there are instances where Criterion gives a spine number to a set and then also to individual releases within that set. Criterion has done this both ways. And then there are instances where Criterion gives a spine number to the individual releases, but not necessarily to the set as a whole. So there are instances of that as well. Here, the Bruce Lee set appears to be one collective spine number without any individual spine number for the individual films. But that's okay. I have no issue with that at all. It's great to see Bruce Lee films and Criterion coming together in this fashion. I should say also that the films are being made available under the specific titles. So for instance, it's The Big Boss and not Fists of Fury. It's Fist of Fury and not Chinese Connection. It's The Way of the Dragon and not Return of the Dragon, etc. So that's a very interesting thing to note. Also, I should point out that the inclusion of Enter the Dragon is a very pleasant surprise for me. I had been assuming that perhaps Enter the Dragon might not be included in any Criterion set, but the fact that it is a very pleasant surprise indeed. So I'm very happy with that, very happy indeed. Now, with respect to the actual Criterion, the Criterion releases or the Criterion supplements, let me just point out that the Criterion supplements for the 7-disc Blu-ray are listed in the Criterion website, and so I encourage you to check out the website for more information. What is being included along with the films themselves? Well, first of all, we have 4K digital restorations of The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, Game of Death, and The Way of the Dragon with uncompressed original monaural soundtracks. I should note it's interesting why they include Game of Death before Way of the Dragon, but in any event, I'm sorry, that's a very minor point. These films were made available, of course, in other non-Criterion releases in the past. Most notably, the 4K restorations of the films were made available in the Shout Select Blu-rays that are right here. My understanding is that these Blu-rays are now out of print, which is a shame, but these are the films that were made available on US Blu-rays in the past. These were really good, and these were 4K restorations also. So my assumption is that Criterion will make its presentation maybe relying on the same 4K restorations. I'm not sure, but we'll have to check that when the set does arrive, which is, for my money, very good news, because these releases from Shout Select were very good, in my opinion. The quality of the audio and the video was very good. The image and the sound was very good indeed. So I was very impressed with that. So there is that with respect to these 4 films that are going to be coming in the Criterion set. Again, I think they will be the same 4K restorations that we saw for these now out of print Shout Select Blu-rays. And also, the Enter the Dragon release is also very important because Enter the Dragon was, we have 2 cuts of this film that are going to be made by Criterion, or made available by Criterion, which is really great news. The 99-minute version, the theatrical version from 1973, and also the 102-minute special edition version, in air quotes. And it's really nice to have these 2 versions because I think now in particular, the 102-minute version is becoming kind of the standard version for home media releases and the like, and so to have those 2 releases, it's really great. I should say also that for the 102-minute version for Enter the Dragon, it's indicated as being 2K digital restoration, whereas for the 99-minute version, it's indicated as being a new 2K digital restoration. So note the use of the word new, suggesting that perhaps for the 99-minute version we are getting a new 2K digital restoration. Again, something to look forward to when it indeed arrives. And then we have alternate audio soundtracks for the films, including original English dub tracks and 5.1 surround soundtrack for the special edition version of Enter the Dragon. So this is also very interesting, and this is something I should point out. You know, for many of these films, for instance, Enter the Dragon here, which I have on a Blu-ray. It also has that really great 2-disc DVD special edition, which is one of the classic releases of DVD releases ever. ever, in my opinion. And as well for the other films that I showed briefly from Shout Select, there are presentations of the films in Cantonese. Well, let's take a look at, for instance, these films. You should note that there are different soundtracks for these films because of the fact that they were released in many territories. And not just that, we have, for example, English soundtrack releases, Cantonese language soundtrack releases, Mandarin Chinese soundtrack releases. But not only that, there are even further different English soundtrack releases for a particular film, for example. And if I could make a further example, let's take the example of the film The Big Boss, or Fists of Fury. This film, as you may know, has many soundtracks available. For instance, a Mandarin language soundtrack, Cantonese language soundtrack, and actually more than one English language soundtrack. And so, and depending on the soundtrack that you rely upon, sometimes there can be some really drastic changes. For instance, the music is also drastically changed, and so we have these kinds of considerations to keep in mind when we're dealing with the audio soundtracks for each of the films. So this is actually a very significant aspect of Bruce Lee's cinema, and I think it's very important to keep this in mind and to know exactly what's being made available and what isn't. And I think based off of this Criterion example or Criterion website, I'm not sure exactly what soundtracks will be made available for each of the films. This is something to keep in mind when the set does indeed arrive. But keep this in mind also, that there are certain elements and aspects and issues that are pretty important depending on what soundtrack version you are relying upon when watching a particular film in this set. So just keep that in mind when the set does indeed arrive. Then there are 6 audio commentaries, so as follows. For The Big Boss, there's an audio commentary by Brandon Bentley and Mike Leader. Then for Fist of Fury, an audio commentary by Mike Leader. Then for Game of Death and Way of the Dragon, Mike Leader commentaries for each. And then for Enter the Dragon, a special edition version, producer Paul Heller soundtrack. So you have a total of 6. These are, as far as I understand it, currently existing commentary tracks. So my understanding, therefore, is we're not getting any new commentary track from Criterion. It would have been nice, of course, to get a new commentary track from Criterion, but of course these current commentary tracks are also very, very good. They have been made available in past releases of these films as well, so it's going to be nice to have those as well. My understanding, of course, also is that there are, of course, other commentary tracks that exist or could exist out there in the world, so this is not necessarily a representation of all the commentary tracks that have ever been created for these films, but this is a good selection in my opinion. I should mention also that, for example, the Mike Leader, Brandon Bentley commentary tracks have been made available from the Shout Select series. To be more specific, Brandon Bentley's commentary track and Mike Lee's commentary tracks there are 2 separate commentary tracks that are made available as options for the Shout Select Blu-ray of The Big Boss. They are really great. Brandon Bentley in particular mentions how this, I think he says it's his favorite film ever, and so he's talking about the film in these terms, which is really wonderful. A wonderful thing to listen to. And the Mike Leader commentary track for here and also for the other films are really great. I know that there's been an issue with not the content of those commentary tracks, but the recording sound quality. And so if Criterion can, if we can assume that Criterion is indeed using those same commentary tracks for this Criterion release, then hopefully some audio issues can be repaired or remedied. But of course, it could also be that maybe Criterion is going to be using these same people, but using new commentary tracks. I'm not sure based off of the Criterion website. It could be either way, but my assumption is that these are going to be currently existing commentary tracks. And if that's the case, then I hope that with respect to the Mike Leader commentary tracks, which are excellent, by the way, certain audio recording issues might be maybe bettered or a little bit remedied, because that's a little bit of an issue in terms of the Mike Leader commentary tracks, the sound quality of them for the Shout Select releases. But don't get me wrong, they are, in terms of content, excellent commentary tracks. And then there is going to be a high-definition presentation of Game of Death 2, the 1981 sequel to Game of Death, which is really great. And I should also mention that, maybe when the set arrives in the mail, that might give me the opportunity to talk in detail about each of these films, because, as I say, I'm really a big fan of them. And I'm also a big fan of Game of Death 2, for different reasons, of course, but I still think it's a very interesting, worthy film to watch. And so this will be very interesting to watch and talk about maybe, hopefully, in a future video. But I'm glad it's being included here. And then, speaking of Game of Death, there's going to be Game of Death Redux, a new presentation of Lee's original Game of Death footage, produced by Alan Canvin. Now, I don't know this particular Game of Death Redux by Alan Canvin. It says new, so I'm assuming it's a new program. If that's the case, that is really great news indeed. Now, I have here, once again, the Shout Select Blu-ray of Game of Death. And if you know the film Game of Death, you'll undoubtedly also be aware of the fact that the film, the ultimate film, was released and prepared after Bruce Lee's untimely passing. And so it has, it's reliant on some footage that Bruce Lee had shot prior to his death, where he was planning a new film, and he was planning certain fight scenes involving a pagoda and fighting certain adversaries on different levels of the pagoda. And it was supposed to be a new film that he was going to make, and then Enter the Dragon came about, and then unfortunately he passed away. But that footage still exists, and the footage was relied upon for not the entirety of the final film Game of Death, but for a key sequence of the film Game of Death. And the film, and the rest of the film was built essentially around that and how they edited that footage. I should point out also that the final film product, Game of Death, does not rely on all of this footage by Bruce Lee. So you're getting only snippets of it or edited versions of it that is still being manipulated for purposes of being fit into this storyline that they created after the fact. So that leaves behind the issue of the footage itself, and it's much more fuller than what you see in the film. And so to examine the footage, I think, is very important for the perspective of getting a better understanding of this film and what it was trying to do, and what Bruce Lee was trying to do at this time. So the footage has been made available through commercial means in the past and through other means, of course. For example, I have here Japanese DVDs from several years back about this particular footage, presented in a very interesting way, I might add. But to see this new presentation of the footage, again, I'm not too familiar with this particular presentation, but I must say that based off of my own knowledge of the footage, it is very important, and I think, therefore, that this presentation included as part of the Criterion supplements for this set is essential for a better appreciation and understanding of this this very interesting film, Game of Death. So I'm very happy to have this included, and I'm looking forward to what it indeed will say about this. Very interesting indeed. Then we have new interviews on all 5 films with Lee biographer Matthew Pauly. Great. And the new interview with producer Andre Morgan about Golden Harvest, the company behind Hong Kong's top martial arts stars, including Lee, which is also great. Then new program about English language dubbing with voice performers Michael Kay and Vaughn Savage. Great. Then new interview with author Grady Hendrix about the Bruceploitation subgenre that followed Lee's death, and a selection of Bruceploitation trailers. Let's stop there. This is very excellent because we're getting new supplements. I'm assuming, therefore, that these are a set of Criterion-produced supplements. We'll check, of course, when the set arrives, but that is very good news indeed, because now Criterion is adding to the conversation about the critical appraisal and assessment of Bruce Lee and his cinema. And as you can gather from the variety of the themes and topics of these supplements here, I think there's a lot in terms of a discussion of Bruce Lee's cinema, in terms of Bruce Lee, the man and the filmmaker, also in terms of the relationship with Golden Harvest, and then also in terms of English dubbing and how that was very important in terms of marketing these films overseas, of course. And then finally, the Bruceploitation subgenre, which I try to allude to a little bit with respect to Game of Death 2, but also this is its own subgenre, which I think shows a couple of things. It shows, of course, the idea of trying to deal with the legend of Bruce Lee and trying to capitalize on the real legend of Bruce Lee after his untimely passing, but also it shows just how much of an impact Bruce Lee indeed had on the film industry at the time, and so his impact was so deep and so everlasting that it created this whole subgenre, fascinating stuff. So it's really interesting to get more information about that. So I look forward to these supplements very much. Then continuing, we have Blood and Steel, a 2004 documentary about the making of Enter the Dragon, and then multiple programs and documentaries about Lee's life and philosophies, including Bruce Lee, the Man and the Legend from 1973, and Bruce Lee in His Own Words from 1998. So let's stop right there. Blood and Steel, The Man and the Legend, and Bruce Lee in His Own Words. Really great documentaries. I should note, however, there's the conspicuous absence of another documentary, for example, The Warrior's Journey. You can actually find Bruce Lee Warrior's Journey as a supplement to certain release copies of the Warner Brothers Blu-ray, for example. Not all of them. The earlier releases have the Warrior's Journey documentary, but I think current releases do not. So if you're looking for that particular supplement, you have to look hard and carefully before making a purchase. But they can be found depending on the particular release that you're talking about. But that particular documentary isn't necessarily listed in the Criterion website right now. However, I should note the word including. It says multiple programs and documentaries, including, etc., etc., etc. This suggests to me that there is the possibility that there will be other documentaries included other than the ones cited here expressly, which means, of course, maybe there might be other documentaries that we don't know of. Maybe, could that mean that A Warrior's Journey will also be included? I'm not sure. If so, that would be very interesting to see. In any event, let's just keep an eye out for what will exactly be included when the set arrives. But for what we are getting now, as listed in the Criterion website, this is really great stuff. Really, really great stuff. So looking forward to that very much. And then we have interviews with Linda Lee Caldwell, Lee's widow, and many of Lee's collaborators and admirers, including actors John T. Ben, Riki Hashimoto, Nora Miao, Robert Wall, Yuen Hua, Simon Yam, and directors Clarence Falk, Sammo Hung, and Wong Jing. This is really great. It's not clear exactly if these are archival interviews or currently existing interviews, or if they are new interviews. We'll have to wait and see when the release indeed is made. But whatever the case, my friends, this is very, very good to have these interviews, and I'm looking forward to this very much. And it says including as well, so maybe this means that there might be more than this. Again, we'll have to check the actual release when it occurs. And then there are promotional materials and new English subtitle translations and subtitles, and an essay by critic Jeff Chang. And then, as I say, cover designs by Jian Galang. So this is an overview of what is to be included for these releases. I should point out just a few minor points. Again, it is not clear exactly what will be actually included as the final product, because we have to wait until July until the set is released. I'm not sure if it's going to be a box set or if it's just going to be a digipack or something like that. That's something to look forward to. Also, in terms of the films themselves, I should point out that I don't see, for instance, any indication of any kind of alternate opening sequence, for instance, The Way of the Dragon. So I'm not sure if any alternate takes or different versions will be presented. According to what I see on the Criterion website, they won't be. So that's a little bit of a shame if that's indeed the case, but we'll have to keep an eye out for that as well. This issue of alternate versions and maybe deleted footage and things like that, I think is actually quite significant, and I don't see any indication of for instance, different cuts, except for Enter the Dragon, which is, of course, in and of itself a really good set of news. But for instance, with the film Game of Death, which I have the Shout Select Blu-ray here, Game of Death apparently is going to be the 100 or 101 minute version, roughly, of the film, which is, my understanding is that's the US version of the film. As some of you may know, there have been alternate cuts of that. In particular, there is a different cut of the version of the film, which is known as the Mandarin Cantonese version, that is made available on a second disc that's included for the Shout Select release here. So we have the US version, which is about 100 minutes, and then the Mandarin Cantonese version, which is about 90 minutes. And so I don't see any indication of a different cut of the film Game of Death being made available in the Criterion release, which is a little bit of a shame because, well, at least it's made available on this particular Blu-ray. So if you can find it and if you're interested, it might be worth checking out, because while there are certain similarities for the most part, there are still actually some differences between the two cuts, and there are actually different versions of scenes played out, and some actually new scenes that are being made for purposes of the Cantonese Mandarin version. That don't necessarily play out in the US version. So there are some differences that are actually worth considering when exploring this particular film. So unfortunately, there's no indication of any different cuts of this particular film or any of the others on the Criterion release, except for, of course, Enter the Dragon. I should point out also that, for example, with a film like The Big Boss, well, actually, let me take a step back. Also, with a film like The Way of the Dragon, also known as Return of the Dragon, there were different cuts, for instance, of the opening sequence, and there were also different versions of it as well in terms of its overseas cut versus its sort of Cantonese or Mandarin version. So let me just see here. So just to give you an indication, this is a running time of approximately 100 minutes, and the version here that is on the Criterion website is described as being 99 minutes. So I'm assuming this is quote-unquote the longer cut. But as some of you may know, this film was released, for instance, in the United States at one point in a slightly condensed version. And also the titles were different. There were different titles depending on the version, the opening title sequence, etc. There were different songs that were used at some point, or the music cues might be different elsewhere. And so I don't see any indication on the Criterion website about any of this information. So if that's the case, that's a little bit of a shame too, but maybe this issue might be addressed, for instance, in the new Criterion supplements that are being planned as well. But that's just something to keep in mind, and something we will have to keep an eye out for when the Criterion set arrives. Also, let me just give one other example, which is The Big Boss, or Fists of Fury, as it's sometimes known. There is, of course, the great commentary tracks from Brandon Bentley, and then another from Mike Leader. In particular, Brandon Bentley speaks about how this film was originally released. And there is a legend that has grown about, because in one particular fight sequence of the film, there appears to be something that is like kind of a really jarring edit or cut, which is suggestive of the possibility that maybe there were cuts and edits, that footage that was excised for purposes of potential censorship or violence issues. And so the point is that there has been a legend that has grown about this film with respect to certain bits of footage that according at least to Brandon Bentley at the time of his commentary, have not been found or anything. It's been reported that maybe there was a more fuller version of the film that was released upon its initial release date, but then were subsequently edited down for purposes of later releases in other territories, and then subsequently in physical media or home media versions. And so there isn't any indication in the Criterion set here, for instance, of any discussion or deleted footage or anything of that note with respect to any of the films, including The Big Boss. I should take that back. Except for the different cuts of Enter the Dragon, there don't seem to be any other indications in the Criterion website about any different versions or alternate takes or deleted footage with respect to the other films that are included in the set, let me put it that way, which again, that's another issue. It's not the most significant issue of Bruce Lee's cinema, but it is one issue to keep in mind when watching the films, because there are different versions that exist out there in the world. So I'm not sure how Criterion will be addressing this, if at all, but just keep that in mind when the set does arrive. That is also very interesting indeed. Once again, I should just draw your attention back to the issue of the soundtracks, the audio soundtracks. Again, I don't know what specific soundtracks will be made available. But we'll keep this in mind, because once again, depending on the soundtrack that's relied upon, you will get different music cues and the like. So let's just keep that in mind when the set actually does arrive. And so I should say that these are, again, I think maybe minor criticisms at the moment anyway. This is, again, based off of purely what's on the Criterion website. So I can't know for sure exactly what's going to be made available. Plus, of course, like with any Criterion set or any set in general, maybe the circumstances are such that this might not necessarily be it might not necessarily be reflective of everything that has ever been made available about every single Bruce Lee film on home media. So it maybe is not necessarily a full, complete version of every kind of Bruce Lee cinema quality and issue that arises. But it seems, however, all the same to be a very good compilation and collection. For those of us who are, let's say, casual fans of Bruce Lee films, maybe are new to Bruce Lee films, this looks like the set to get. If you are interested, of course. And then for those of us who maybe are more completist in terms of Bruce Lee films and Bruce Lee film collecting, I'm not sure exactly if this set will be everything that you are looking for. It might come close, which is good, but there might be some things that are already satisfied by your current Bruce Lee collection, let me put it that way. But then again, we will have to wait and see what the actual set is and what it will include before I can make any concrete conclusion about that. But again, for those of us who are more Bruce Lee collection enthusiasts, again, it's not clear exactly whether this will satisfy every aspect of that. I'm not sure if this will scratch every itch in terms of that, but it might come close, and it still is going to be, I think, a very worthy release in the context of Bruce Lee cinema, and also in the context of Criterion, when indeed it occurs, which is hopefully as planned, which is going to be in the middle of July 2020. So I'm very excited for this, and I am, as I say, I'm a very great admirer of Bruce Lee cinema. I always have been, and I will continue to be. And I'm just very much looking forward to this with great enthusiasm. And I should say also, as a final note, that I also observe that we are in the middle of April 2020, and the world is currently in the grip of this very serious crisis that is affecting essentially everyone in one way or another. And I'm sure the Criterion Collection people, the crew there, are also being affected in one way or another. So I must say thank you very much. I don't think anyone at Criterion will be watching this video, but let me just say anyway, thank you very much to the people at Criterion for continuing to work hard, even if the circumstances are very, very limited and very stressful, and the situation is quite dire in a lot of places in the world. It's still an unfortunate situation that is occurring throughout the globe, and so The most important thing is, of course, is that everyone, including the good people at Criterion, are safe and healthy and well during this time. And so my warmest regards to you and to the people at Criterion for continuing to work hard and continuing to do their best despite these circumstances. So my warmest regards to you, and my well wishes and hopes that everything is well, or as well as can be expected considering the circumstances. So please continue to be well and stay safe, and take very good care of yourselves during this time. And I must say finally that I have to apologize if, again, considering that the circumstances are very, very stressful and very hectic and very strange and quite dire. Again, depending on where one is in the world, they are very, very serious. And so anything that I might say in this video, if it sounds like a criticism of the set, again, I don't mean it that way. I don't want to sound like I am ungrateful in terms of Criterion's efforts, or indeed the efforts of any other Blu-ray label that is still trying to do its best to create content and product that will satisfy its fans and film fans around the world. Again, these are really tough and strained circumstances, and so anything that I say that might sound like a criticism, again, they're just for purposes of the product itself, but that is in no way meant to suggest in any way that I am ungrateful for your efforts, because I am indeed very, very grateful. Very grateful for all the efforts and endeavors and just the amount of dedication that people at Criterion and many other labels other than Criterion, of course, they're still trying to do their best given the circumstances. And so I, for one, appreciate it very, very much. Very, very much indeed. So I apologize if my comments might have sounded like maybe criticisms, but my intent was to show how much respect that I have for you and for everyone else who is doing their best during these times, and despite these very unusual circumstances. So bravo to you, bravo to everyone who continues to work hard in this industry. And please, the most important thing is just to stay safe and be well and take very good care of yourselves. Yes, and warmest regards to you. You are friends to all of us in the community, and we really appreciate your great efforts. And so just continue to stay safe, my dear friends, our dear friends. Please continue to stay safe. So, my friends, that's it for now. And so if you have any comments about this exciting news, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what it is you have to say. Finally, I have to say, if you're still here, I have to apologize because there were certain audio issues with respect to recording this particular video today. So if you experience some audio issues with my own recording and my voice, etc., that is just technical difficulties on my part, so I apologize for that. I will try to fix that in later videos. In the meantime, please continue to take good care of yourselves, be happy and healthy and well, and warmest regards to all. My dear friends, thank you again, and cheers.